establish why we're having this conversation, as I was saying just before we hit record, I do a lot of work in market research. My dog is in the background. I don't know if you can hear him panting or not. I work in market research and brand strategy and other kinds of strategy work. And so over the years, obviously, inevitably, you wind up working on something Web3 or crypto related if you're in the digital space at all. Hilariously, I just did a project that was about the physical design of a workspace for a major crypto company that I won't name because it's a relatively recently concluded project. And so in the course of those engagements, I'm interacting with the people more than I am with the technology. I have to be able to talk about the technology so I understand it at a basic level. It's a fun parlor trick where I make my husband explain the blockchain to me and then try to think of any reason why I would ever need to use it. And I will also admit another bias, which is I went to law school. So I have yet to see a really good reason that smart contracts should ever replace real contracts. There's my little bit of shade there. I mean, there are things where it makes sense to me, but also you're still going to go in front of a judge at some point if there's a dispute. Right. So I don't know what we're talking about here. But in any case, that's sort of how I came to my skepticism, was just encountering the cultures of these companies. A lot of them are a little wild-eyed and weird, or there's this kind of, and I again steal this phrase from something my husband said to me once about a company he'd done work with, of kind of joyless excellence. These are not the happy-go-lucky tech people of the aughts. That version of the web is long gone. These people are pretty doom and gloom about the future of the world and want to believe that their technology is going to save us. So it feels less about we're going to change the world and more like we're going to save a few of us from eventual doom. So this is where I'm coming from. My husband tells me about Web3 is going great. I start following that. Amazing. And then I followed subscribed to your newsletter. And of late, you have been working on something that's of particular interest to me and to this show, which is how the crypto industry is trying to influence the election. And I will admit, on this project I did recently for a big crypto company, they are active in some of these PACs. And so when you go onto their website, it's very easy to find yourself reading a survey report about people's crypto behavior that just doesn't track with any other reputable third-party pollster. You look at that data, and then you look at Pew or anybody else, and it's twice as many. Again, people supposedly have crypto. A lot of fuzziness about the numbers and a lot of really bad research report practices. So I was fascinated to see that had also crossed your radar. And I wanted to talk to you about what you're finding as you try to kind of follow the money of this political influence and understand what's going on with these reports, because, not shockingly to me as someone who's worked in research for a long time, but people will just sort of credulously repeat numbers if they have been presented to them because they're numbers, not necessarily because they're true. So that's the big wind up, the big preamble here of why I wanted to talk to you about this. And so I'm so grateful that you are here to talk about some of your work on this. And maybe just the place to start is, at what point did you start to notice that they were pushing these kinds of polls and starting to form PACs?
So the polls are something I came across when I was reading just sort of about the crypto industry's involvement in the elections, which they've been very public about. They've been, pushing people to get involved and sort of portraying this narrative around, this needs to be the crypto election. We need to get the crypto voters to come out and support these candidates. And I kept seeing numbers, mostly from Coinbase, that likes to repeat this number that 52 million Americans own cryptocurrency. They say that constantly. And it's one of those things, like you mentioned, it's a number and people love numbers. And so it's gotten picked up by Congress people and, you see it everywhere. But when you actually do the math on that, that works out to 20% of Americans currently own crypto is the claim. And that doesn't really pass the smell check, I think. If you just think about, your friends or your, people, do you really think 20% of them are actively owning crypto? And it really doesn't line up with the numbers out of other sources. There's been Pew surveys, there was a Federal Reserve report that put the number somewhere like 7%, so it's
Mm-hmm.
very, very different. And so I was digging into where that number came from, trying to find other numbers to compare to. And, as I was paying attention to this, poll after poll after poll kept coming out. They've been doing them constantly, the
Mm-hmm.
industry. And again, trying to really strongly push this narrative around crypto as a major election issue. The crypto vote is something that politicians need to chase down. And so it's just been on my radar as I pay attention again to this really broad campaign by the crypto industry to get involved in the upcoming election, both with monetary support, which has been massive, and through these sort of influence campaigns where they are trying to convince people that crypto is something that, if you're a politician, you need to embrace crypto because otherwise people aren't going to vote for you.
Right. And so maybe a place to begin here before we before we try to tackle the question of even the existence of a single issue crypto voter, um, which color me skeptical about that as well. Even if we scale it down to like the 7% of people who hold crypto, how many of them are
Right.
saying, if they got called by New York Times, Sienna would say, my top issue, the thing that's really driving me
Right.
is crypto. Um, what are they? Why are they doing this? Why get involved in politics at this point? What are they trying to accomplish with that whole endeavor? Why put $150 million
Yeah.
in a PAC and start trying to, influence
Right.
Congress and candidates?
So I think the crypto industry is really at a sort of existential point in the United States where they are at risk of legislation that could dramatically diminish what they're able to do, the types of services that they provide, the types of assets that they sell. They've certainly been, broadly speaking, targets of enforcement actions by the Securities and Exchange Commission and other agencies, which are, enforcing existing legislation against them that they have, generally speaking, just ignored. And then, there's also the on the other hand, there's the opportunity that legislation could increase the types of things that they're able to do, which is certainly something that they would like. And so, I think the industry at this point feels like it is crucial to get legislation passed that is friendly to them, that does not diminish what they're able to do, and ideally would even expand what they're able to do without imposing the types of consumer protection, legislation that tends to be a little bit more onerous for the companies, involved. And they've certainly been active in politics in the past. There's been money going into elections out of the crypto industry. We've seen people from the crypto industry trying to push legislation in Congress. But I think that the past couple of years, we've seen them have a tough time getting the laws they want passed. A handful of laws have been proposed and mostly died in, various stages. There's been, broadly speaking, some Republican support for crypto industry interests. It's not all Republicans, and certainly it's not. There are some Democrats and independents as well that support their interests, but they don't have enough support, I think, on Capitol Hill to get the legislation they want passed. And I think they've become very aware of that in the last couple of years. And so they've begun this campaign to install Congress people who would fight for their interests, and also to oust Congress people who have been vocally critical of the industry, who have pushed legislation that would install more consumer protections and, again, be more onerous to the crypto industry, like Elizabeth Warren, for example, who is
Mm-hmm.
sort of a public enemy number one in Congress for the crypto industry.
Right. And I think there was also quite a bit of buzz about the idea that crypto is responsible. And again, I think this may be quite a bit overblown given just basic name ID problems that she had. But Katie Porter's election
Yeah.
in some respects was seen well, and I don't know that it was actually her election because she stopped running for Congress to try to run for Senate from California, which was also probably a strategic mistake. She's not well known in her own district, let alone the rest of the state, and she's running against people who are on MSNBC every night of the week. So, like, maybe not. But nevertheless, there was a lot of money poured into campaigning against her because she is part
Right.
of that kind of. I mean, she literally was, I think, a law student of Elizabeth Warren's. So, um, what did I don't know how closely you were looking at that particular event, but what do you make of the decision to pick targets and go after them with money and advertising and other forms of influence?
Yeah, so Katie Porter was a massive target of the crypto industry. They poured about $10 million into opposing her in that Senate race. And like you said, I think a lot of it stemmed from the fact that she's seen to be a strong ally of Elizabeth Warren and someone who would, mimic some of her policy positions on things. It's interesting because she's not been super vocal about the crypto industry. She, I think she signed on to a letter about crypto mining in Texas or something like that, but it's not something that
Mm-hmm.
she is really hammering on in the same way that Warren has. But it seems that just that affiliation and certainly some of her interests as far as going up against, moneyed interests, I think,
Mm-hmm.
made her a bit of a target. I think it's sort of the same pattern that we've seen elsewhere in the crypto spending, where in many cases they are spending simply to oust someone that they worry is too opposed to their industry, without necessarily caring who's installed instead of them.
Mm-hmm.
So um we saw a similar thing in New York with Jamal Bowman, where they spent, I believe, around $2 million to oppose him. And it didn't seem that they were particularly interested in the opposition candidate, who, again, didn't have a particularly strong stance on crypto. They just wanted the opponent out.
Mm.
There's, other races with significant opposition spending that have gone similarly.
Yeah.
And so I think, it's just one of those strategies where they are trying to get anyone out who has been vocally opposed to crypto. And then in other races, they do strongly support various candidates who have made promises or who have voting records that suggest they would be friendly to the industry.
It seems like politicians haven't quite figured out how how to behave around this particular topic. I
I
mean,
think you could have stopped that sentence just
how to behave.
three
Yeah.
words in. Yeah.
I mean, that is fair. They definitely have not figured out how to behave. Um, I spent all day doing like a deep dive into the question of authenticity as applied to politicians. And it's just
Mm.
so funny. It's just like some of it is like they're lacking charisma, and some of it is like they're a little bit awkward on the stage, and some of it is they're a woman, and like it's just
Yeah.
like what constitutes authenticity is tricky, and some of it just is down to like you know he's a bad dresser or something, right?
Oh,
but
yeah.
but yeah, these are not the most these are not people who know what they're doing all the time. But no, I think in particular here, because we had as the whole SBF situation was unfolding, a lot of reporting about the amount of money that was coming from him into Congress and into other politicians' political coffers. There was sort of a sort of spasm of trying to paint the Democrats as having been corrupted by
Mm.
crypto because SBF gave slightly more money to Democrats than to Republicans, though it turned out there was a lot of money being spread around. You have politicians who will, including Trump, and you noted this in one of your pieces, will say, like, I think it's a scam and it's a disaster waiting to happen, but oh, buy my NFTs and I'm going to do a coin now.
Yeah.
There's like, which way should we go on this? And I think a certain amount of bafflement about what even are the politics of people in crypto. At a very basic level, I think somebody like an Elizabeth Warren is just simply sort of offended by the idea that they need a separate financial regulatory schema apart from the one
Yeah.
we already have. which applies to, it's not a huge leap to decide that some crypto products are securities and others are commodities or something else. And it's sort of this that feels of a piece with the long-standing sort of criticism that people in Congress don't understand technology and so therefore don't know how to regulate it. But these are financial products in some small part. And so, lawyers do know how to regulate financial products. They've been doing it for a really long time. And I think there's this kind of, I guess, do you have a read on the broader kind of political makeup of crypto pros besides just like, don't regulate my crypto, man? Like, is there some other kind of greater political philosophy at work here?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of crypto really does stem from a sort of singular place. If you go back to the origins of cryptocurrency, Bitcoin was created shortly after the financial crisis in the United States in 2008. And there was this broad distrust of financial institutions. There was this belief that these institutions and the government had mishandled people's money, that you couldn't trust the institutions or the government with your financial future, and that there needed to be a different way that was separate from the big institutions, separate from the government, outside of government control, where, your assets were yours no matter what, and you were free to lose them or, do whatever with them. And it comes from this sort of libertarian place of, the government has no right to get involved with my finances or even know what they are. And so that really is a through line, I think, through a lot of the cryptocurrency politics, which is that, the government should have no influence on what we're doing. Just let us play with our financial instruments and stay away from us, that type of thing. There is, this strongly libertarian anti-government aspect to it. But then I think in more recent years, as crypto has become more of an industry and we've seen companies, billion-dollar companies spring up in the space, there's sort of this weird twist to it now where we're seeing ones that are like, sort of doing away with that ideology and saying, no, we want to be regulated. We want to operate within the confines of the law. They've started to implement many of the systems used by the same traditional financial institutions that they originally claimed to try to do away with. And so there's sort of this other side of crypto now that's a little bit less ideological in terms of that very libertarian, very get your hands out of my business side of things, that wants the government, to be involved to some extent, usually only in the ways that sort of help the
Benefit
companies.
them,
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of your standard. Most companies feel that way. But there is a similar feeling from the crypto industry, as you see from a lot of parts of just the tech industry, broadly speaking, which is that we don't want to be regulated. You don't properly understand what we're doing, and you should leave it to us to regulate ourselves or to take care of our own business, because you people just don't understand all of the innovation and the potential of our glorious products. And we've sort of seen the outcomes of letting the industry self-regulate or not as it happens, and doesn't seem to be going very well, but. Broadly speaking, I think that that's really the root of it, is this sort of, libertarian, we don't want you involved with our money type of thing.
Yeah. There was a great piece in Adam Tooze's Substack in July that that was sort of talking about why the Republicans this cycle seem to be actively attempting to at least court crypto money, and that there is this kind of mix of libertarianism in almost like the conspiratorial sense of libertarianism, as well as just the basic, like, fairly dark view. I think he called it a dark view of human nature and phobic attitudes towards the state. And that like doesn't mix super well with America's version of liberalism, which is
Right.
certainly not democratic socialism as you might have it in Western Europe, but is, broadly speaking, more trusting of institutions, let's say, and more believing in regulation. But that the RNC platform this year specifically included a crypto piece to it was really interesting to me. I didn't know that until I saw that in Adam's piece, talking about I think what it says is Republicans will end Democrats' unlawful and un-American crypto crackdown and oppose the creation of a central bank digital currency. I mean, we have a US like stable coin already, so I don't know what they're planning to. Do you think that's what they mean by that? Is getting rid of USDC?
No, so the CBDC thing is fascinating. When they're referring to a central bank digital currency, they're actually referring to something issued by the U.S. government, unlike USDC, for example, which is issued by a private company.
Right.
There is this broad fear among Republicans that there might be some sort of CBDC, which is often likened to programs in China where CBDCs are, exist, and there are all these concerns that they might be used for surveillance, or there might be controls put on them that might stop how you can spend your money, for example. But it's turned into this weird sort of boogeyman among Republicans because there's not been a strong push to create a CBDC. And yet there are all of these, legislators and even the RNC who are saying, we need to ban this, as though it is sort of an imminent threat, even though there's really not been any discussion of creating a CBDC.
It's such a funny thing because there are moments where you can look at these things and go, you guys have lost your minds. And then other moments where it's like, oh, there is a through line. There is a through line to the founding here of Hamilton and Jefferson having fights over whether or not there should even be a central bank of the United States. And it's why we don't really technically, we have the Federal Reserve, and it's, and I was talking to Mike Podorzer last time about this, or last week about this rather, these are very old fights about whether or not to have centralized currency, even obviously pre-Constitution and the Articles of Confederation, everybody was printing their own notes. And so it's just lately I feel like every one of these conversations where the RNC says something or the Republican Party says something especially nuts, it's like, oh, right, you want to roll back changes to the pre-1789 order. It's like they keep getting more ambitious. It's not just let's take it back to 1864. It's let's take it back to 1788. In any case, so that's wild. I guess I sort of skimmed that part and just thought, what, you guys don't like stable coins? But they've picked.
No, they love stable coins. It's really they want them controlled by private companies, which again, as you mentioned, is sort of like, oh, so wildcat banking again? How did that go last time?
Everybody loves it. Everybody loves it every time there's some sort of wildcat financial system. I think the other things that are funny in there are the right to mine Bitcoin. And I is this my brain went to, is this because people are starting to talk about sort of the energy load of doing these activities? So this is actually kind of vaguely anti-environmental as well.
Yeah, it's at least a part of that, I would say. There's this very strong opposition to the idea that the government would control how you use your electricity, and that they might, say, well, you can use electricity for this, but not for that. There have also been some campaigns to shut down cryptocurrency mines for various reasons, but a lot of it actually has come down to noise pollution. There have been cryptocurrency mines that have been set up, many in Texas, because electricity is cheap, where they are actually sort of terrorizing local communities because they produce this very constant sound. It's sort of this hum that is deafening in some cases and has been causing issues in communities. And then there's also the issue, especially in Texas, around the relationship between Bitcoin miners and the electricity grid, where a lot of miners have entered into relationships with electricity providers where they're actually paid to shut down crypto mines. And
Mm.
so during peak times, usually, in the middle of the summer when everyone's AC is running, they're actually being paid to not mine cryptocurrency, which is
Mm.
being subsidized by, the electricity consumers who are paying exorbitant rates for electricity
Right.
that they can't live without because they will die of heat stroke. And so there's certainly been opposition there as well. And so people in the cryptocurrency world are, I think, scared of this idea of a crackdown on crypto mining, for all of the reasons I mentioned.
All right. So, yep, great. So, cool. The mining Bitcoin more important than people surviving hot summers in Texas.
Correct.
Awesome. And then, then they talk about the kind of right to self-custody of digital assets and transactions free from surveillance and control.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting to me about this is, basically since the fallout of the last couple of years, like the very big player in this space, and this seems to be reflected in who's racking the packs and who's then stacking those packs with money. I'm just going to keep making similar sounds. Is Brian Armstrong at Coinbase.
Mm-hmm.
And yet at the same time, Coinbase goes kind of out of its way to talk about being open to clear regulatory guidance, asking for more regulatory guidance, doing business with large institutional investors and banks. All of these things would, suggest a desire, certainly for sort of stability and respectability and so on. But the kind of reports coming out, the research coming out, the blog that accompanies these packs that some of the websites just look like they used the Coinbase style guide and just called
Yeah.
it Fair Fight or whatever it's called. And like that is what is it called? The
Fair shake.
Fair Shake. Sorry, Fair Fight is I think in Georgia, but Fair Shake, it literally looks just like a Coinbase website.
Yeah.
Which suggests that it is just a Coinbase website. But what's going on there? My tongue-in-cheek question was, where's all the money coming from, and why is it Brian Armstrong?
Yeah. So Coinbase and Brian Armstrong have been heavily involved in these efforts to influence politics in a handful of ways. Coinbase has certainly been one of the largest contributors to these super PACs. They've donated something like $50 million this cycle mostly to Fairshake. Although they have also contributed, there are other crypto super PACs that they've supported as well, although they're all kind of related. Mm-hmm. But, Coinbase has also been very active even before this election in trying to rally its customers to become politically active. They have this group that they call Stand with Crypto, which mm-hmm. they claim is, supposed to be this very grassroots initiative to gather people who care about cryptocurrency and, encourage them to call their representatives and all this other stuff. The Coinbase app recommends the politicians that you should support. It's all very involved, trying to get mm-hmm. these campaigns going. And I think it comes down to what I mentioned earlier, which is that Coinbase is at a crossroads to some extent around legislation in the United States, whether or not it will be friendly to their business or whether it will reduce what they can be doing. They are involved in lawsuits right now. They've been fighting a lawsuit with the SEC for quite some time. They've, gone on the offensive even against the SEC to try to establish regulations that would be friendly to them. And, you mentioned this refrain that is incredibly common out of Coinbase, but it's been picked up by the whole industry, really, which is that we want regulatory clarity. We want to operate within the bounds of the law. We want to be regulated. We just don't understand, the regulations are not clear, which is really not true. The regulations are quite clear. The crypto industry does not like the regulations, and so they largely ignore them. And then they're sued by the SEC, and then they are, they make these claims that they just need clarity, or they basically are making the claim that these securities laws are outdated. They are not sufficient to capture the complexities of innovative technology like cryptocurrency.
Mm-hmm.
When in reality, the securities laws were designed to be very broad and broadly applicable to many types of financial instruments, so that you don't need to write a new law every time someone comes up with something new.
Mm-hmm.
It's that's the design. And so the campaign is quite there is this sort of PR campaign that goes along with it, which is that we want to be within the law, we want to be the regulated, trustworthy exchange. But what they really mean is we want regulations that are friendly to us, that carve out loopholes in securities laws and other financial regulations that allow us to do the types of things that we want to do, and to some extent that they've just been doing already outside of the boundaries of the law. And it's really just a part of that general push.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, Coinbase has been a major player in this, but they're certainly not the only one. There have been other companies like Ripple,
Mm-hmm.
the Winklevoss twins who run the Gemini cryptocurrency exchange have been heavily involved. And various others, Andreessen Horowitz, which is a
Right.
venture capital firm that has major cryptocurrency investments, folks like that.
Yeah, there's a couple of places to go with that. What one is, I would imagine that they are quite heartened that the court basically overturned Chevron deference, because the idea that like, well, we have these regulations, they just have to be applied to you. Well, all they have to do now is run to court and say, but they don't apply to us, and we're going to need a judge's ruling on that. And they're, I suppose, going to constantly want to go. Uh, I don't know. I don't know if Kaczmarek in Texas is crypto friendly. I'm going to go ahead and guess he probably is. And like, so they're just going to go to the Fifth Circuit in Amarillo, Texas, and get a ruling from Kaczmarek, who's going to say, oh no, this is not a regulated asset at all. And yet they are pushing even harder. It seems like they were just given a huge gift by the courts, but it looks like they want to head off at the pass any attempt to actually draft legislation that might be specific to them, or might amend existing regulations to specifically address crypto products.
I think a lot of it really comes down to the battle with the SEC. And the SEC has been quite clear that they believe most crypto assets, with the exception of Bitcoin and perhaps a couple others, are securities.
Yeah.
And that the way that these companies are offering them constitutes unregistered offerings. They have made, there are many lawsuits in progress, against Coinbase, but against other cryptocurrency exchanges as well, Binance and several others, making the same arguments. And certainly the SEC has made those statements publicly as well. And so what the crypto industry really wants, I think, is some sort of legislation or, some sort of ruling that cryptocurrencies are not under the purview of the SEC. They mostly have been pushing to be regulated by the CFTC,
Right.
which they view as a much friendlier regulator. They're certainly a much smaller agency with fewer resources to aggressively pursue cases against the industry compared to the SEC. And so I think a lot of it really just comes down to that battle and, the hope that Congress could throw a wrench in some of these cases that have been playing out for years in some cases, where judges have mostly agreed with the SEC's stance that there's not anything so novel here that the SEC, can't regulate these companies under existing laws. And again, the industry doesn't like that and is pushing to have that changed, which I think is why they've been so active, even as you mentioned, after the Chevron decision.
Yeah. I think my laughter throughout the process of trying to get judges to say that it's not security is much of the argument has been, no, judge, we don't want you to reason by analogy. And the reason I laugh at that is like, that's the whole first year of law school. Reasoning by analogy is how you get into law school. It's part of the LSATs. And then it's a whole big, like, it's how you learn how to read the law. So that's not going to be a winning strategy. They're going to probably have to get, a regulation that says, no, they're not covered by SEC. I guess then to come back to these polls, it's a non-trivial number of people who hold crypto or have held crypto. It is an area of a lot of coverage and a lot of interest. Why do this weird like you have a piece from a couple of weeks ago looking at a recent poll of Democratic voters that came out of Paradigm, which is a VC firm, but was handled by Mercury Analytics. And you very helpfully did an annotated an annotation of the report itself, and they are definitely playing fast and loose with how they are tallying up numbers, how they are representing those numbers visually in their charts, and how they are connecting ideas that have some reasonably broad level of agreement back to crypto without specifically mentioning crypto in the statements at all. There's a variety of things in there that I'll just sort of candidly say a couple of things as a researcher. One is that they did not do any open ends at all. Tells me they were doing it on the cheap. Because otherwise you just like anytime you give people the option of saying other, most of the time in a survey, that other is an open end and people can write in what other is. But if they're not offering people other or they're not allowing people to type anything after other on the bottom of the punch list, then like they did not want to pay for coding of the open ends.
So and they actually said as much to me, which is that they did not do this open-ended question because it would have been very expensive.
It's so funny because it's like I continue to be, again, I do not mainly work in political polling or any kind of, we occasionally get approached by organizations that want to do what I consider to be PR polling. So they want to make a point. And they want us to design research that will make that point. And that's not the world I come out of. And so that's not how we do it. But the other thing is they are extremely, hilariously, it does not benefit large for-profit corporations to have bad data about their customers.
Yeah, right. You would think.
Yes. If they're trying to make a PR point, they go someplace else clearly for that. But I think what was interesting to me about it was here you are hot and heavy trying to influence this election, trying to make the case for a single issue crypto voter, and then like cheaping out on method. And I just sort of like, there's a lot of money swirling around here. You could afford to spend $10,000 more and get the open ends coded and add some open ends to the survey. And I don't even know if it would cost you a whole $10,000 more, but call it $5,000 is not a lot of money. Pay for the freaking open ends. And the reason you would do that is you might actually get better information out of the open ends than out of these weird, like, well, we're going to try to connect the idea of not having a lot of trust in the financial system to therefore being pro-crypto. But that's not what the statement says. How much trust do you have in the financial system? Crypto is not mentioned here. So then they're kind of trying to tally those numbers up. The other thing that I think is very interesting about what they did is here's my best guess. If I could recreate what happened here. Mercury did a survey as inexpensively as Paradigm asked for. They asked the questions that Paradigm asked them to ask. Pretty much, they basically probably let Paradigm write the survey instrument. They fielded it, and they provided the crosstabs. And then Paradigm wrote the report. And the reason I think that is just that down to things like color coding and representation of, one bar chart stacked on top of another bar chart where the 18% looks like it's 80%. Compared to the one below, which has multiple factors adding up to 100. Like, this is just like, researchers don't do this. I don't even, like, even the hacks don't do that because you have to make the software do that. The software doesn't want you to do it that way either. Like, there are just basic statistical representation standards that exist in software, and you have to go in and change it to make it look like this. So my best guess is Paradigm wrote that report and fiddled the dials to make things look a particular kind of way. So if a busy congressman or politician or aide to one of those people is just flicking through it, ooh, that looks pretty significant to me. And I guess, like, again, it's not unusual for PR polling to be a bit misleading, but there's like a bit misleading where we asked a bunch of I don't know, years and years ago, there was like a women's workwear brand. I don't remember which one it was that put out this report that was like, it's not years actually ago. It was like 2022, maybe late 2021. And it was like, women really want to go back to the office. And it's because they want to dress up. And I was like, it's because they're sick of being stuck inside their house. And also,
Yeah.
there's all this countervailing evidence that actually people did not want to go back to the office. So, like that's whatever. That's fine. You ask those questions to boost your brand and to get some PR out of it. And the Today Show is going to talk about how women want to go back to work and wear suits. Whatever. but these things, like the numbers aren't so wrestled to the ground as they appear to be in a lot of these reports. There's the one from Paradigm. There's the one that Blockchain Association and DCG did. They did a couple of them, I think. There's also the report that's up on one of the Coinbase blogs that also had it at like 20+% crypto ownership. And I'm just curious about, why are they going to these lengths? Is it just because there just aren't enough of these people to actually constitute a constituency?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to, I think the goal of a lot of these polls is really to convince Congress people and to convince prospective political candidates that this is something they need to care about in order to get votes. You see throughout the polls, regardless of who's publishing them, these narratives that are basically talking directly to Congress people, saying, in order to win, you need to embrace crypto because there is this large group of people who care so much about crypto that they will vote for anyone who supports it, regardless of political party, other issues that they care about. But as you point out, that doesn't actually seem to be true. The numbers don't really support the conclusions that they're coming to, which I think is why they've had to do all of this wrangling to make it seem that maybe they do. It's also, I think, why you see in the survey design, they seem to be very much sidestepping questions that you would ask if you were trying to establish that there were a significant group of people who are going to be voting specifically because of their crypto beliefs. All of these polls ask questions around crypto ownership, the number of people who either currently own crypto or have owned crypto in the past. And then they ask questions about political viewpoints that are very broad. Do you worry about inflation? Do you worry about government surveilling your financial activities? And then they sort of glue those two things together to suggest that, okay, here's this group of people who own crypto, who care about these things politically. Therefore, they support pro-crypto candidates who support the policies that the crypto industry wants. If you were actually trying to establish if somebody, who owns crypto or doesn't, is going to vote based on those beliefs, you would ask questions that had to do with, the strength of their beliefs, their feelings about cryptocurrency, their, willingness to cross party lines to vote for somebody who supports various policies. You would ask about the policies that they support, those types of things. Those questions are not being asked, I think, because they don't want to know the answers to them. They don't want to have to publish the fact that actually, no, a lot of people who hold crypto are normal people who care about a broad range of political issues. They have partisan affiliations. They worry about things that average people worry about that aren't just, does the balance in their Coinbase account go up or down?
Right.
And so, that's why I think you see all of these gymnastics to try to come to those conclusions instead of just asking the questions, because I think they would get the data that that really conflicts with the narrative.
Yeah. I mean, it's even funny, some of the things that they do with these kinds of, you start thin slicing it down and they're drawing very large conclusions from base sizes of actually about 100 people. There'll be 800 or 1,000 people in the total survey, but then they will go look at, there was one that was like non-Harris voters in the one
God,
for
this
Democrats. And
really got to me.
it's like 104 people out of the total sample. And like, we're drawing major conclusions about what the non-Harris voters are doing. And the non-Harris voters aren't necessarily Harris rejectors. They included the
Right.
undecided, right?
Yeah.
So,
It's not non-Harris voters. It's
yeah.
just people who did not click Harris when they asked who they would vote for.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they seem to do a lot of that. They also seem to be particularly, I found it interesting that they did some oversampling of people of color in that as well, where they had like an extra
Yes.
like 300 people or something, 100 and boost for probably African American, Hispanic, and AAPI. Probably.
AAPI, yeah.
Yeah. And so like that does seem to be a particularly interesting move they're making. And I have seen it in other things as well, of trying to say like, oh no, people of color are particularly interested in this. What do you think is driving that angle?
Yeah, so that has been a really strong narrative throughout all of these polls, which is that, look, people of color like crypto more than white people. Younger people like crypto more than the average person. They're sort of going for these very specific demographic groups. And I think a lot of that, again, is targeted to politicians who are really focused on reaching those particular groups of voters. There are politicians who are, very much trying to solicit Black voters or young voters or women voters or, various demographic groups that they're otherwise perhaps having trouble reaching. And so the crypto industry is saying, look, young people like crypto, Black people like crypto, etc., not so much women, then if you embrace crypto, it will be so helpful to your broader goal of reaching voters of color or whichever group it might be. But again, we see issues in terms of the actual facts when it comes to these demographic groups that I think maybe don't support the narrative so much. And certainly I think are concerning just in terms of the overall narrative that's being pushed. As I pointed out in my annotation of the paradigm poll, the reality is that a lot of people of color did buy crypto. I think it is true that at least to some extent there has been more adoption among communities of color. I think the numbers are a little hard to nail down, but Pew asked these questions as well, and there have been other pollsters who've asked. But when you look at the timing of it, there have been several reports that show that these communities have bought into crypto later than the average than perhaps some white people who have been, interested in crypto for a longer time. And the timing of it suggests that a lot of people of color who created this, boost in the numbers bought in at all-time highs and then lost a lot of that cryptocurrency during the 2022 crypto collapse. There was a report out of, I think, The Atlantic, I want to say, that basically did a little bit more analysis suggesting that many people of color bought high and sold low and have lost a lot of money on cryptocurrency. And I think that if you are one of those people, do you really support the pro crypto candidate who's saying we want more of this? We want, people of color to keep buying into crypto. There are all of these sort of weird, almost affinity fraud type narratives coming out saying that, oh, look, you've had issues with the traditional financial system. Maybe you've been excluded unfairly from accessing financial services that you deserve, or there's at least histories of that happening, and perhaps you don't trust financial institutions. You should get crypto. Crypto will fix everything. Crypto will be equitable. Crypto will give you these services that you need, which has not been the case. Crypto is not a replacement for the traditional financial system. Right. You can't access the same services. You can't get a mortgage through crypto in any reasonable way. I'm sure someone out there is doing it, but it is a very scary world when you get into lending and all this stuff
Yeah.
that's happening in the crypto world that is trying to mimic these financial institutions. And so those narratives, I think, are really misleading, for one,
Mm-hmm.
and also probably misrepresent the true sort of feelings about crypto
Mm-hmm.
among people who do hold crypto.
Right. I mean, it's a really interesting, talking about crypto coming up out of the 2008 financial crisis, and then thinking about some, there are a lot of competing narratives about what exactly happened with GameStop and the whole meme stonk situation, and Wall Street bets. But like one of the narratives was basically like, here's a group of people that there has been no bubble for them to take advantage of. And so like, here's your chance. Like the lesson of, I mean, we do this a lot with financial crises. We learn kind of the wrong lesson. Like the lesson of 2008
Right.
was don't lend to people who are higher risk borrowers, when maybe the answer was don't securitize to the nth degree mortgage products.
Right.
Like maybe that was the lesson. But instead it's like, well, just don't lend to lower middle class people.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Don't lend to construction companies to build new housing. Also awesome. Like it's been great since then.
Right.
But the same thing feels like they're trying to twist there, which is like that access to wealth, that access to generational wealth, that sense of not being able to access certain kinds of financial products because in your communities it's extremely high interest, or just like the legacies of redlining frankly continue to persist in the financial
Right.
system. And so like here's something from outside of that will be better, but of course it is uninsured, highly volatile, hard to understand, hard to access, hard to execute, all of the rest of it. And so it's very interesting that they are kind of continuing to exploit that data point. But also, I think one of the things that I appreciated about Pew's study on this was that they asked the have you ever, and then they asked when was the
Yeah.
last time? And it's like,
Right.
all of a sudden it goes from, whatever, 17% have ever, and, 5% in the last year or something. Like there were a lot of people, to your point, that held and then didn't.
Right. And I think
And
the
yeah,
Pew even showed that the numbers have been going down over the past couple of
yeah,
years as well, which again, I think contradicts a lot of the narratives out of these polls that try to suggest that it's an increasing number of people actively holding crypto.
yeah.
Yeah. And another thing I appreciated about the Pew polls, which are, I would say, conspicuously missing from a lot of the crypto industry polls, is really the sentiment end of things, because a lot of the crypto industry polls try to assume that a person who holds crypto or who has held crypto inherently supports pro crypto, quote unquote, policies, or the same policies that would be friendly to the crypto industry.
Mm-hmm.
And they sort of don't capture the fact that there are quite a large range of people who would have to tick the yes box to yes, I have held crypto at some point, or even I do hold crypto now, who do not feel positively about crypto, who
Right.
do not think that regulation should be loosened on the cryptocurrency industry. I mean, I would check that box, right? Like, I've held crypto, I hold crypto at the current moment, and obviously I am not supportive of the crypto industry's policies.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of people in that demographic who held crypto and lost everything, or
Right.
who feel like they were scammed because of their willingness to get involved with crypto, and who do not think that crypto is something that should be unleashed upon the general public. And so these questions are not included in these polls, I think, because they don't want to say, oh, okay, this is the number of people who actually feel positively about crypto, or
Mm-hmm.
who would vote for the same policies the industry supports.
Right.
And to that same point, I think there are a lot of people who do feel positively about cryptocurrency who do not feel positively about the cryptocurrency industry and the types
Right.
of things that industry is promoting. Because, like I said, a lot of people are very ideologically interested in cryptocurrency and the sort of, anti-governments, anyone can do what they want with their money, end of things, who do not support these policies that are basically intended to protect the cryptocurrency industry, create this system that's much like the traditional financial system that the asset class supposedly is, trying to avoid, who do not care what Coinbase wants. They just want to hold Bitcoin, self-custody Bitcoin, or whichever
Mm-hmm.
asset, and are not interested in subsidizing Brian Armstrong's
Right.
vacation.
Right. So I know we've only got do you have a couple more minutes?
Yep. Yeah.
So with that little bit of time, I did want to ask about something that popped up in recent days as a bit of a news item, which is Nate Silver joining as an advisor, a paid advisor to Polymarket, which is a prediction market where you can place bets on just about anything.
Just about anything.
Yes, and some of them are just like, I don't even know why you do a bet about, like, what is the purpose of this bet. But there's a lot of looking at Polymarket and Predict It and a few others over the last several cycles, in part because mostly guys who engage in election forecasting are gamblers. They are you can modify that word however you like, but they are in fact gamblers. They play poker, they gamble, they're interested in a lot of the purpose of forecasting for them arises out of that impulse. And again, my husband and I had this conversation the other night of like, it's the same reason why every time I try to play poker, you have to remind me what the rules are, because I do not store this information. And I do not store this information because I don't care about poker. And part of the reason I don't care about poker is I don't really care about winning these kinds of games of chance. And there's like, I'm interested in chance. I love chance, actually. It's part of why I do what I do for a living. I like the randomness and I like the possibilities, but I don't need my opinion to be validated with a bet. I don't need to be proved right with money in this way. And I think that's just sort of the fundamental thing there. Nevertheless, we know Nate Silver plays poker. We know that, he kind of came out of baseball stats and that sort of thing. Now he's at Polymarket. Polymarket is interesting because it is fundamentally a crypto business. You
Yes.
buy crypto shares and use those shares to place your bets. But now CFTC has said, yes, you can place money bets on US elections, which is awesome because that wasn't the case before. But one of the reasons people say that it's useful to look at these prediction markets is a wisdom of the crowd principle,
Right.
and that they do as well as or better predicting the outcome than the polls do. Now, of course, enter all my pollster friends who will come in and say, polls are not predictions, they're snapshots in time, et cetera, et cetera. So really probably what we're doing is comparing the forecasts versus the prediction markets. But I guess my question is, if I've got to have a crypto wallet and I've got to buy a share in a crypto coin or whatever in order to place these bets, how representative can Polymarket possibly be of the American electorate? And I guess just sort of broadly, like, you know more about this space than I do. I just kind of look at it and had a shake my damn head response to it. But what do you make of this move of having somebody like Nate Silver attached to Polymarket having more freedom to engage in these kinds of bets around US elections, and what we all should make of it?
Well, I think there's a lot to unpack there. I think to start on the sampling and sort of representative nature of this, I think that's something that goes incredibly under mentioned in reporting on Polymarket. There's been this trend recently, and particularly with respect to this election, to represent Polymarket as a trustworthy pollster, basically, as though they are, performing polls that, of the types that you see out of the more reliable pollsters. And that's really not the case. Pollsters go to great lengths to try to ensure that they're achieving a representative sample of whichever demographic group or subset they're trying to poll. There is no such, goal with Polymarket. And as you mentioned, the fact that it's online, the fact that it requires you to have a cryptocurrency wallet, you have to know how to purchase cryptocurrency elsewhere. Not only that, but Polymarket is not available to U.S. Citizens. You're not supposed to be able to bet on Polymarket in the U.S. Because of regulatory issues, and so you need to be able to bypass those restrictions, which, in fairness, are quite easily bypassed. But, you
No.
know, it is some degree of technological expertise to do that, or you need to be outside of the US.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is really narrowing and narrowing and narrowing the group of people who are actually placing bets on these platforms to crypto people, to degens, you know, to people who are gambling on cryptocurrency in many cases. And you see that in the polls that are coming out of Polymarket. You know, if you put aside the major polls, you know, who's going to win the election, who's going to do well in the debate, et cetera,
Mm-hmm.
you see that bias very, very clearly, where these polls or these betting markets, the outcomes that people are betting on are not the ones that they think necessarily will come true. They're the ones that they want to have come true. And so I use as an example every time I talk about this, during the Bitcoin 2024 conference, which was earlier this year,
Mm-hmm.
Donald Trump was speaking. His speech was delayed by almost an hour. And people at the conference began trying to come up with explanations for why that was happening. And they convinced themselves that it was because a special guest was going to be joining, and they you know, were waiting on this special guest to arrive, or I don't really know what the story was. They decided that it was because Elon Musk was going to come and join Donald Trump on stage at the Bitcoin 2024 conference, which was something they desperately wanted to have happen because they worship Elon Musk.
Right.
They think it would be good for Bitcoin for him to show up, et cetera. And so there was this betting market on Polymarket at the time, you know, real time, as people are, you know, sitting in the crowd on their phones betting that Elon Musk is going to show up. And it was at like, I don't know, 30% or something like that he was going to show up, which is like quite a high number.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, you can go and look at public available data on the location of Elon Musk's jet. And you could see at the same time that people are betting that he's about to get up on stage in Nashville, Tennessee, that his airplane is flying past Nashville on his way to Memphis or something, where he was trying to set up a, you know, some unrelated thing with Tesla. And so like real data was completely contradicting the narrative. And still they had this 30% chance that Elon Musk was going to like parachute out of his airplane and land on stage at the Bitcoin conference.
Very Tony Stark.
And so, yeah, exactly. Right. And so like, I think that's just a really good example of the fact that like, this is not what crypto people think is going to happen. This is not based on, you know, the best available information. It's based on what they want to have happen.
Right.
And so when you look at any of the other poll or betting markets at Polymarket, you
Beyonce
see that
at the DNC. Yeah.
Exactly. And you see, you know, that's why I think for a long time, Polymarket was showing Donald Trump with a strong lead over Kamala Harris that did not, you know, that was not reflected in the more traditional polls, because the crypto industry wants Donald Trump to be elected. The crypto, you know, the group of crypto people who are placing bets on Polymarket generally are supportive of Donald Trump. And so, you know, these biases are extremely clear in the Polymarket betting markets. But again, we're seeing like traditional mainstream news outlets treating Polymarket as though it is this contender with the pollsters, without mentioning this type of bias and without mentioning this very clear, you know, sort of impulse of these degen crypto gamblers to bet on the underdog, or to try to take the, you know, try to arbitrage these bets, or, you know, do all sorts of weird stuff that influences, you know, this supposed outcome that they're predicting. So I think that's, you know, a huge issue just in terms of the reporting on Polymarket. As far as Nate Silver joining, I mean, I guess I don't really know what to make of that. He's sort of an odd duck in general. And, you know, I'm sure there's a lot of money to be made by taking a position at Polymarket. And, you know, it certainly is, I think, strategic move by Polymarket to, you know, embrace and bring into the fold somebody who has such a reputation as a pollster. It's a way to try to legitimize the data that's coming out of Polymarket, for lack of a better word. And so I think that, you know, is again something that needs to be taken into account.
He's been pretty open of late, of talking about, you know, on Twitter mainly, like, I'm not sure that this is necessarily, you know, plus EV, but it's good for my Substack. Like,
Yeah, right.
it's good for the, he's got like 200,000 subscribers on his Substack now. So, and
Right.
I think actually quite wisely, in fact, I think other media outlets should have done this from the jump, is the forecasts help no voter. They're not useful, or, like, and the problem is, I think that there is, and this is going to be kind of one of the last questions I want to ask you, is about how these things get represented by, frankly, journalists, who do not necessarily understand. I shouldn't even say necessarily, who do not understand these spaces as well as you do. That, like, the way they talk about these things wind up influencing how people think about them. And I think this is this kind of, this idea of a feedback loop. I think a lot of people who work in particularly legacy journalism are very allergic to the idea that they are in any way shaping
Yes.
the discourse or giving people kind of anchor ideas to organize their thoughts about a topic around. Like, it's just, it's part of why I was doing this dive yesterday into the authenticity. It's like, who starts talking about a candidate being authentic first? Is it voters in, say, focus groups, or unaided, unprompted? Or is it reporters who just don't like that candidate? They
Yeah.
don't like the
Or
way
who
Al
see a
Gore
tweet.
dresses.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
it is. But that to me is, I think one of the things about, and this brings it back to the polling as well, is that polling data gets sometimes quite credulously repeated, not just by
Yes.
politicians, but by journalists, because there aren't a lot of, like, Morning Consult is polling on crypto, but they're doing it on behalf of crypto organizations.
Right.
Mercury Analytics is, a perfectly fine research company, but they're being hired by a crypto VC firm in order to conduct this research for a specific purpose, and that is PR. They're, data can be collected lots of ways. Data can be represented lots of ways. But if you're not critically thinking about, hang on, how did they do this? How did they ask this question? How are they representing these things? What does this data really say? Like you did in your annotation, your other pieces about this, then there's just this kind of repeating of, there's a crypto voter. And I think during Katie Porter's race, like, that was just sort of taken as read, that there was a crypto voter, and that there were people who were really upset about this crypto thing. And maybe it was mostly crypto companies or whatever, but that there was something coming for them. And I think this also has that effect with Polymarket. If we just sort of refer to it as a prediction market, people don't necessarily know what that means, or who's there, or how you engage in it, or what kind of predictions are being made. And so you're referencing it. It must be credible. 538's done this now for 10 plus years. And now, so is Steve Kornacki or whoever. And so I'm curious about what advice you would give to journalists who maybe don't have this as their beat, but they're going to include it in their reporting. What should they be doing to be more responsible about the way that they represent this data or represent these data sources?
I'm so glad you asked. Yeah, I mean, I think that journalists really need to understand that they have a responsibility to accurately reflect the state of the world. And they need to be very cautious about, the biases that come into these supposed data points that they're citing. I think there's this really strong tendency among people to see a number and go, oh, that is the state of the world. That is a neutral, unbiased number because it's a number, without actually questioning how that number was achieved, where, what actually went into the question methodologically, what is the quality of the polling, is it a representative sample, et cetera, et cetera. And you just see these numbers and you're like, it's a number, good. And so, for a journalist, if you're seeing a number, ask, where did the number come from? How was that number reached? Actually go look at the poll, look at the report that the company published. It's these blog posts or whatever in Paradigm's case, or, sometimes there's this like slideshow or, however they do it. Go look at that, but also dig into what those numbers actually say, because in a lot of cases you'll see numbers, this was something that was happening in the Paradigm poll, where they'll put in, big text headline, X number of people hold crypto. And then it's like, okay, go look at what's the other group that is not being highlighted,
Yes.
like,
27% of people do something means that 74% or whatever aren't doing it. Yes, yes.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that you see throughout these polls, which is that the other number is often actually the sort of more important number, but it's not the number that's in the big text. And so it actually requires you to go dig around, ideally get the data from the pollster if you're able to. A lot of these groups will not.
I got to tell you, I was shocked that you called the research company and asked them questions. I have yet to see any reported published research where it was clear to me that the journalist called the research company and said, this math isn't mathing, and then had them actually revise a headline. So I was, you get like so many extra points for having done that because most people don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a very real chance that you will not get a response or that they will refuse to give you the data. But you might as well ask, because sometimes they'll say yes. And in this case, they said yes. And I talked to them and I was able to, there was in one case a actual error in their data or in their report rather, that was misrepresenting the data. And I was like, what is this? And they're like, ooh, we should fix that. And there's value in that. And then you can also get additional information in some cases that helps you evaluate whether or not the poll is something you should even be paying attention to. And so, in this case, I was able to get more information about how they were sampling. I was able to understand, they did not disclose that the poll was conducted online, for example, which is something that's very important when it comes to polling about cryptocurrency, because you tend to get a skewed sample of people who are taking online polls. They tend to be more technologically savvy. They have access to connectivity, et cetera. And so I think just asking these questions and, understanding where the data is coming from and then communicating that very clearly to the reader so that the reader has that context, that this is not just a number that came down from God, that is showing okay, it is a fact that 52 million Americans own crypto or whatever it is. No, you say Coinbase claims that 52 Americans own crypto. And if there is data that challenges that claim, you mention it. Or if there is, some degree of uncertainty around that claim, you mention it. And you mention that it's coming out of the industry that would benefit from being believed. I think that's just really sort of standard journalism that is being missed by a lot of these publications. And I don't know if it's due to, certainly this is a tough time for journalists. They have, they are trying to meet tight deadlines. They don't have the time to make a phone call maybe, but, it is their responsibility to clearly and accurately represent the state of the world. And, if that means, omitting a shiny number because you can't confidently say that number is accurate, then so be it. I would rather you not publish something than publish something that might be inaccurate or that might contribute to misunderstandings. It is not the journalist's job to reprint the PR of a company. It is journalist's job to question the powerful and to, give the information to people who need it.
Right. One of the places, obviously, I think they should start is by subscribing to your newsletter, which is Citation Needed. But where else should people follow your work? And because I think you do a very good job of talking about this at a level of both credibility and accessibility. So it's clear that you understand the space. It's clear that you're, doing projects in crypto and understand the technology and how to use it. That's not that. I was going to say that shouldn't be a question once you start reading your work, though I know that you still get that question quite a bit. I was watching some YouTube videos last night to prepare for this, and I was like, oh my God, really? Yeah. Let's just check this girl understands crypto. Seems like the vibe. But how else can people follow your work and help support the work that you do?
Yeah, so my newsletter is citationneeded.news. You can also find my projects. I have web3isgoingjustgreat.com. There's also followthecrypto.org, which is the election spending project that I've been working on. And then you can kind of find me anywhere. I'm mollywhite.net. All of my social and stuff is linked from there.
That's great. Yes, that Follow the Crypto is a real resource for trying to understand how this money is moving around in this space, which is not the easiest thing to do in election financing. So more power to you for taking it on as a project. Crosstabs is hosted by me, Farrah Bostic, production by The Difference Engine, and edited now by Allison Preisinger of AMP Studio. Music from Audio Jungle by S Audio. Find us at crosstabspodcast.com, where you can subscribe to our weekly Substack, also available at crosstabspod.substack.com. Tell your friends about the show, subscribe on your favorite podcast service, and give the show a rating or review. I would love to hear from you, and it will help other people find the show. Email me if you have any questions, ideas for episode topics, suggestions for future guests, or want to talk about ways we can work together at farrah@crosstabspodcast.com. See you next time.